I'm trying to look a little angelic right now. I don't know if that's what it's giving. Is it giving? Is it taking? Is it receiving? Before I get into this video, I just wanted to say that over here on Books on My Social Life, we stand with Palestine, period. We also stand in solidarity with the people of Congo, Sudan, Haiti. In my next video, which is hopefully going to be a December reading vlog type of situation, I'm going to be discussing some of the books that I'm currently reading on Palestine. So I will be discussing this in future videos in more detail, but this video is really just about the 24 books that I would like to read next year. Keywords being would like to read. These are my top priority books as they stand right now, but this is very much subject to change. The reason why I decided to do this video is because I saw Mina doing it and I kind of got the urge to do it myself, so I quote tweeted it and was like, would y'all watch this if I do it? And everybody, like a bunch of people replied and said yes, do it. And I'm like, okay, cool. This is for y'all on Twitter. I hope y'all watch this. And I also encourage you to go over and watch Mina's video. We actually have one book in common, and I'm really excited about that book. So I've divided the 24 books into 4 categories, 6 books in each category. So the first category of books are books about Palestine, because I have made a promise to myself that I would read more about Palestine. I'm currently reading a few books right now, but some of the books that I would like to read next year are first a few fiction books, like this one right here. This is called Where the Streets Had a Name by Randa Abdel Fattah. She is a young adult author of Palestinian heritage from Australia, and she usually writes about like the Muslim Australian experience in her YA books, but this book actually takes place in Palestine. This is a story about a girl named Hayat who is from Bethlehem, and she wants to sneak over into West Jerusalem to retrieve soil from the yard or the land that her grandmother was originally from. So the story is about her attempt to do that. I've heard really good things about this book, and I've really enjoyed other works by this author, so I'm definitely excited to dive into it. I also want to read some translated fiction this year, and I have a few titles that I would like to read, but the only one that I have a copy of, so the one that I'll be prioritizing the most, is this one here. It is called My First and Only Love by Sahar Khalifa, translated by Ida Bamia. I believe this one is about a woman who is from Nablus, and she leaves Palestine only to return decades later and I think rekindle a romance with somebody who she was in love with in her childhood. I think I could be wrong. Either way, I'm excited to dive into this, and I really want to read more translated fiction this year. I also have Salt Houses by Hala Alian. This one is a multi-generational family saga, which y'all know that's my tea. That's my favorite type of book to read. A tea. So Salt Houses also follows a family from Nablus from the 1940s before the Nakba to modern day. The great thing about multi-generational families is that they show you how families are affected by historical events over time, over generations, and it's really important to also understand how that looks for Palestinian families, many of whom are experiencing intergenerational trauma from the history of their displacement. So this story, I think, probably explores that. I read another book similar to this called Mornings in Jenin last year, if you recall. It was one of my favorite books of last year. I really, really loved it. So I'm really looking forward to this one as well. I have some nonfiction that I would like to read too, like Angela Davis's Freedom is a Constant Struggle. I believe this is a compilation of different essays from Angela Davis that meant to show the connection between different types of oppression, from the Palestinian struggle to the Black American struggle. I've heard great things about this, and I think it's definitely something that I should read. I also have The 100 Years War on Palestine by Rashid Khalidi, and this is a history of Palestine, and particularly the enactments of war against the Palestinian people since 1917 going up to 2017. A lot of people have been reading this and highly recommending it, so I wanted to get into it. And I'm also reading a deeper history book about Palestine right now, but I don't think I'll finish it before the end of the year, so I'm putting it on this list. It's called Palestine, A 4,000-Year History by Nur Masalha. This goes all the way back from ancient Canaan to Palestine as a Roman province to Palestine under the Arab conquest to the Ottoman Empire. So it's a vast history that is meant to explore the history of Palestinian people and how long they have been on that land and how connected they are to that land, and that they are the indigenous people to that land. So far, I'm only a few pages in. It's a very dense historical book, so I can't really say too much about it thus far, but I learned so much from just those 10 pages in the introduction. And the introduction is 50 pages long. So my goal is to finish at least the introduction before the year ends, but I'm definitely not going to finish this whole book before the year ends. The next category of books that I would like to read are classics. I have the first 2 books in the Drop Caps collection. So we have Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen and Jane Eyre's, no, not Jane yet. What's she name? Charlotte Bronte, but no. Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. So, Pride and Prejudice. I don't need to tell y'all what this is about. I want to read it this year. As well as Jane Eyre. This is a classic that I've always wanted to read. Like, I've always been drawn to this. I don't know why. So I'm finally reading it. I'm about 2 chapters in, but again, I'm not going to finish this before the end of the year. I'd also like to start Dracula this year. What I would like to do is read the letters according to the dates. I know there's a newsletter that you could subscribe to. My friend was telling me about it, where they actually send you the book in letters, I think. But instead of doing that, I might just read the book just according to the actual dates. That way, if I feel compelled to read a little bit more past the date, I will. If you didn't know, Dracula by Bram Stoker, you know, it's about the vampire or whatever, it's written in letters from like May to November. And so what some people do is they just read the book like on the days that the letters were written. So the first letter is like May 9th, I think, and then the second letter is May 11th. So you read the first letter on May 9th, you read the second letter on May 11th, and you just do that until November. And I think that's an easier way to digest this book. I tried to read this years ago and I really could not get through it because it is just very dense and waffly and I wasn't enjoying it. We also have modern classics. I have a Toni Morrison here with me, and I just decided to pick one of the 2 Toni Morrison books that I own physical copies of. So I had this, which is The Bluest Eye, and I also had Paradise, but I hear more about this book, so I decided to go ahead and put this on the list. I should have read Toni Morrison at this point in my life, but I haven't, so we're going to fix that this year. We're also going to fix the fact that I have not read Octavia E. Butler, so I'm going to read Kindred this year, which is her first book, and it's a really interesting story, from what I understand, about a black woman in America in the 1970s, because this book was published in the 1970s, who keeps getting sent back in time to when slavery was still happening in the 19th century, I believe. I think the mystery of the book is why this keeps happening to her, and she's slowly but surely realizing that she may have to do something that is horrible, but that is going to procure her own existence. So it's a book about, like, you know, coming to terms with the history of enslavement as a black person in America. I don't know. We'll see. If I get the time, I would also like to read 1984 by George Orwell. I have read Animal Farm and I really loved it, and I tried to read 1984 a couple of years back, but I couldn't get through it. So we're gonna try again this year, and hopefully I do get through it. The next category of books is just general fiction, and I'll start off with a book that builds nicely off of 1984. This is called The Memory Police by Yoko Ogawa. It was translated from Japanese by Stephen Snyder. And this is a really interesting dystopia novel that I think is somewhat inspired by 1984. Set in a world where things disappear, and after those things disappear, people forget they ever existed. So like one day, birds will disappear, or perfume will disappear, and people will just forget that those things ever existed. But there are a few people in this world who remember, and those people are a threat to the society, so they are targeted by the memory police who try to exterminate them. Speaking of Japan, this next book is actually a reread. And it's my favorite book of all time. If you know me, you know exactly what book I'm talking about. It's A Tale for the Time Being by Ruth Ozeki. This is a book about a woman who is from Canada, and she stumbles across the diary of a young girl from Japan named Naoko. So it's a dual perspective, because we're reading the story of the woman who's reading the diary, but we're also reading the diary along with her. And we go on the most compelling and epic and amazing journey. No book has ever been able to top this for me, and I think that has to do with the sentimental attachment that I have to it at this point. I first read it in 2016 out of the library. I reread it again in 2021, and I think it's time for a reread again. I really like to claim that I like sci-fi, but I don't read nearly enough of it, and I have not read a lot of steampunk. And so there's a steampunk book that I really want to read, and this is actually the book that I have in common with Mina. It's called Master of the Jinn by P. Jelly Clark. I hope I'm saying that name correctly. And this is set in like an alternative historical Cairo that is steampunk. And that's all I know about this book, and that's all I need to know about this book. That's why I bought it when I first heard of it, because I'm like, steampunk, but like Egypt. I have not read a lot of Native American literature, and I also would like to challenge that or fix that this year. So I have Birdie by Tracy Lindbergh, and this one actually takes place in Canada. It's about a Native Canadian woman who is Cree, and I'm not exactly sure what it's about. The summary is a little bit vague, but I think it's just about her going on a journey to find herself. May the odds be ever in her favor. Hopefully I could go on that journey with her. I've also been wanting to read more Muslim literature in general, but specifically queer Muslim literature. It exists. There's a couple titles out there, and there's a couple titles that I would like to read next year, and one of them is When We Were Sisters by Fatima Asghar. All I know about this book is that it is queer. It has some kind of like exploration of queerness in it, and it's a story about these three Muslim sisters who are left orphaned. Their parents pass away, and it's about them sort of finding themselves and their lives after that, I suppose. And finally, for fiction, every year I tried. And finally, for fiction, so my cousins upstairs, like they move the furniture a lot. So yeah, every year I try to prioritize reading some local books, some books by Trinidadian authors set in Trinidad, and one of the many local books that I would like to read next year is Pleasant View by Celeste Mohammed. I haven't read this one as yet. It came out like 2 years ago at this point. I've heard such fantastic things about this book, and it's also really short. It's a novel in stories, according to the cover. And I think what that means is that it follows a community of people in Trinidad who live in a place called Pleasant View. I don't think that's a real place. Correct me if I'm wrong if there's a place in Trinidad called Pleasant View that I've never heard of. And it's about just the different people in the community and how their lives intertwine, I suppose. And it's supposed to be a really smart and interesting commentary on Trinidadian culture and society. Moving on to nonfiction, and a good segue from that book into the first nonfiction book I have here is called Out of the Doubles Kitchen by Badruddin. So I don't know if you know what Doubles is, but it is the #1 street food of Trinidad and Tobago. It's one of the things we're most known for. Doubles was created by a Muslim Indian family in Trinidad, the Dean family, in, I want to say, the 1920s was when they first made it. Imamul and Rasulan Dean. And yeah, they were the ones who invented doubles, I think. Apparently. I'll read the book and let you know. A good segue off of that, all these books just feed into each other so nicely. This is Islam and the Americas, which was edited by anthropologist Aisha Khan. Collection of essays about the history and culture of Islam in various parts of the Americas, particularly Latin America and the Caribbean. There are 4 essays in here on Trinidad, 3 of which are by people I know personally and who I work with. My supervisor, my boss, and another professor from my department. This is a thesis read, so it's meant to represent all of the books that I have to read next year for my thesis. I am doing a master's in gender studies. My focus is on, broadly speaking, Islam in the Caribbean, but with a specific focus on Indo-Trinidadian Muslim masculinity. The 4 essays in here are really, really good. I've read them and I've cited them before, but I want to go back and read the entire thing because the rest of the essays here about the Muslim presence in the non-Anglophone Latin America, which I admittedly don't know too much or really anything about. Speaking of Latin America, oh gosh, I love this. This is the Motorcycle Diaries by Ernesto Che Guevara. It's my Spanish, good. Che Guevara, you know, stickers of him are on every angsty leftist MacBook. This is his memoir of when he left to go to Cuba, I believe, and he left from his home in Argentina on a motorcycle with his best friend, and they drove through Argentina, Chile, Peru, and Venezuela. Probably other countries too, Bolivia, Ecuador, Colombia, I don't know. And from Venezuela, he then went to Cuba, but the book ends in Venezuela. I know all of this because I actually watched the movie that this book was adapted into. It was an amazing film. I loved it. It's been years since I watched it, but I just remember loving that film, and I would like to rewatch it, but before I do that, I want to go into reading the book first. Jumping back to Islam, we have Hijab Butch Blues by Lamia H. This is a memoir of a queer Muslim woman who wears hijab. Lamia was born in South Asia, then when she was really young she moved to the Middle East, and eventually she moved to either the US or Canada. And so it's about her experiences as an immigrant, but also as a Muslim and also as a queer person, and I suppose how she figures those aspects of herself out. The last 2 books are about a topic that I have become very interested in as of late. You would have noticed this if you kept track of my reading since like mid last year to early this year, but I have really gotten into anthropology, paleoanthropology, archaeology, learning about ancient history. At the Dawn of Everything by David Greba and David Wengro. I did read the introduction to this book earlier this year, and I really enjoyed it, but I never went back to it. It is essentially a book that tries to critique the normative narrative of human history, which is usually like,
oh, you know, we were all hunter-gatherers and we were all happy, and then the big bad agrarian revolution happened, and then humans started to become terrible.
so like this book tries to critique that normative narrative by also centering non-Western and indigenous perspectives. It's very long, so this very well may not be one that I get to next year, and even if I do, I probably won't finish it. But it's okay, you know. We'll see. Again, this video is really just like aiming for the stars. The Lulu is the Salulu. Final book I would like to read next year. This one is a monstrosity. As I said, I really got into paleoanthropology. I'm such a nerd. Like,
I really got into paleoanthropology over the last year.
this is called From Lucy to Language. Is it in frame? Let me see. Yeah, it is. From Lucy to Language by Donald Johnson and Blake Edgar. Principal photography by David Brill. This is a photography book, but also a book about paleoanthropology. But a lot of it is really just like, so there's a lot of like words and explanations in it and academic text, but accompanied by these really gorgeous pictures of ancient human art, ancient human skulls and skeletons, different like human species like Neanderthals and Homo erectus and Homo. Ooh! She said hello. I will address, you know, probably the elephant in the room, which is that one, paleoanthropology is a field that is constantly updating. And so this book may very well be outdated in terms of some of the classifications and stuff like that. Like way more discoveries have been made since this was published in... Oh! It's signed by Donald Johnson. That's cool. Wow. Yeah, it was published in 1996. So yeah, definitely probably very outdated. And also, you know, there's the whole, like the classification of human species is also its own sort of problematic beast, as, you know, rooted in traditional classical archaeology and white supremacy and all those things. We don't need to get into it, but y'all know, if y'all know the tea, y'all know the tea and how the tea teas, right? TTs. I need to end this video. That concludes this video. It's very chaotic and very off the cuff. Yeah, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. And until next time, inshallah, keep reading.